During a fierce snowstorm, a kind young woman sheltered an old lady. The next day, a mysterious millionaire arrived, revealing a truth that would change her life forever. Without your subscription, we might never meet again. Follow, comment, and share right now. Don't risk it. Let's start the tale. The howling wind rattled the windows of Maple Street Diner as Jessica Porter wiped down the counter for the 5th time that hour. Outside, Burlington, Vermont had disappeared under a veil of white, the worst blizzard in decades transforming the quaint town into an Arctic wasteland. Her few remaining customers had left hours ago, but Jessica couldn't bring herself to close early. The diner was her life now, all that remained of her dreams. "Another cup, hun?" she asked the elderly gentleman nursing a coffee in the corner booth. Mr. Winters was a regular who walked 3 blocks every day, blizzard or not, for her homemade pie and a sympathetic ear. "Better not. Margaret will have my hide if my blood pressure spikes again." He slid a 20 across the table. "You should close up, Jessica. This storm's getting worse by the minute." Jessica smiled but shook her head. "I'll stay open a bit longer. Some folks might need shelter." As if summoned by her words, the door burst open with a gust of snow and frigid air. Jessica turned, expecting to see the usual plow driver stopping for coffee, but instead found an elderly woman stumbling through the entrance. She was bundled in a coat far too thin for the weather, her silver hair dusted with snowflakes, her face pale with cold. "Oh my goodness!" Jessica rushed forward, catching the woman as she swayed. "Are you all right?" I got lost," the woman murmured, her voice trembling with cold. "My taxi dropped me off. Wrong street. I can't find my son's address." Jessica guided her to the nearest booth. "Mr. Winters, could you turn up the heat? I'll get some hot tea." Within minutes, Jessica had wrapped the woman in the emergency blanket she kept under the counter and placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea between her trembling hands. "Thank you, dear," the woman said, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "I'm Eleanor Mitchell." Jessica Porter. "You picked a rough day to get lost in Burlington," she said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Where were you trying to go? Maybe I can help." Eleanor sipped her tea, hands still shaking slightly. "My son lives here. I haven't seen him well, it's been 5 years now." I thought it was time to make amends. Something in the woman's voice, regret, longing, hope, struck a chord in Jessica. She knew about broken relationships and the courage it took to try and mend them. "Do you have his address? I can call someone to drive you there when the roads clear a bit." "I forgot it." Eleanor fumbled in her purse, producing a slip of paper. "Lakeside Manor. Apartment 1201. It's supposed to be on the north side of town." Jessica's eyebrows rose. Lakeside Manor was the most exclusive address in Burlington. A sleek, glass tower of luxury condos overlooking Lake Champlain. Whoever Eleanor's son was, he wasn't hurting for money. "That's quite a ways from here, especially in this weather," Jessica said gently. "The roads to that part of town might be closed until tomorrow." Eleanor's shoulders slumped. "I should have called him first, but I wanted to surprise him." A shadow crossed her face. "He's always been so busy with his work. I thought if I just showed up." "You can wait here as long as you need," Jessica assured her, patting the woman's hand. "The diner's not much, but it's warm." "Mr." Winters rose from his booth, buttoning his coat. "I better head home before my street becomes impassable." "You ladies stay safe," he nodded to Eleanor. "You're in good hands with our Jessica. Best heart in Burlington." After he left, Jessica busied herself making fresh coffee and heating soup for Eleanor. The woman's eyes followed her movements around the diner. "You own this place?" Eleanor asked. Jessica laughed softly. "Just manage it, though sometimes I pretend it's mine." She ladled steaming chicken noodle soup into a bowl. "I always wanted my own restaurant." "It's charming," Eleanor said, glancing around at the worn but clean surroundings. The diner had seen better days, but Jessica kept it spotless. The red vinyl booths gleaming, the chrome fixtures polished to a shine. "It pays the bills," Jessica replied, setting the soup before Eleanor. "And I like the people. Everyone has a story." Eleanor studied her with surprisingly sharp blue eyes. "And what's your story, dear?" "A smart, kind young woman like you. Shouldn't you be running your own place by now?" Jessica's smile faltered slightly. Life took some unexpected turns. She smoothed her apron, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. But that's ancient history. Eat your soup before it gets cold. As the afternoon wore on, the storm intensified. Jessica called her boss to explain she was staying open as emergency shelter, then made up a makeshift bed for Eleanor in the back office. The older woman had grown tired, the journey and cold taking their toll. "I should call my son," Eleanor murmured as Jessica helped her to the small couch. "He'll be worried if he checks his security cameras and sees I've arrived but not made it to his building." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Security cameras? Ethan is cautious about his privacy. He has the building notify him of visitors." Jessica handed her the diner's phone. "Call him. Let him know you're safe." Eleanor dialed, her expression anxious. After several rings, she sighed. Voicemail. Again. She left a brief message explaining where she was, then handed the phone back to Jessica. "He's probably in a meeting. Ethan practically lives at his office." "What does he do?" Jessica asked, helping Eleanor settle on the couch. "He runs Mitchell Innovations, created some software that changed everything, apparently." Eleanor's voice held a mixture of pride and sadness. "He was always brilliant, even as a boy, too smart for his own good sometimes." Jessica froze. Mitchell Innovations was one of the largest tech companies in the Northeast. Its CEO, Ethan Mitchell, was infamous in business circles for his ruthless acquisitions and demanding leadership style. His face regularly graced the business section of newspapers, always with the same stern expression, never smiling. "Your son is Ethan Mitchell?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Eleanor nodded, pulling the blanket Jessica offered around her shoulders. "You've heard of him." "Everyone in Vermont has heard of him," Jessica said carefully. She didn't add that most of what she'd heard wasn't flattering, ruthless, cold-hearted, impossible to work for. These were the whispers that followed Ethan Mitchell's name. "He wasn't always like whatever you've heard," Eleanor said softly, as if reading Jessica's thoughts. "After his father died, something changed. He built walls, pushed people away, even me." Her eyes grew distant. "Especially me." Jessica felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever Ethan Mitchell was now, he had once been someone's little boy. Someone who apparently still inspired his elderly mother to brave a blizzard for reconciliation. "Rest now," she said gently. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, Jessica returned to the empty diner. The snow continued to fall in thick, hypnotic sheets, piling against the windows. She should be frightened by the intensity of the storm, worried about power outages or frozen pipes. But instead, she felt an odd sense of peace. For the first time in years, she had nowhere else to be, no one demanding her time or attention. Just an empty diner, a sleeping woman, and the quiet hush of snow blanketing the world. Jessica was wiping down tables when headlights cut through the swirling snow outside. A massive black SUV pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching through the accumulated drifts. A tall figure emerged, battling against the wind as he made his way to the diner's entrance. When the door opened, Jessica found herself face to face with the last person she expected to see that night. Ethan Mitchell stood in her doorway, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, his expensive coat dusted with white. His face, so familiar from news photos, was even more striking in person, all sharp angles and intensity, blue eyes, the exact shade of Eleanor scanning the empty diner until they locked on Jessica. "I'm looking for Eleanor Mitchell," he said without preamble, his deep voice clipped and businesslike. She left a message saying she was here. Jessica straightened, meeting Ethan Mitchell's intense gaze with practiced composure. 5 years managing a diner had taught her to handle difficult customers, and she suspected the man standing before her defined the word difficult. "Mr. Mitchell," she said calmly, "your mother is resting in my office." She was half frozen when she arrived. Something flickered in his eyes, concern perhaps. It disappeared so quickly, Jessica wondered if she'd imagined it. "Take me to her." Not a request, a command. Jessica crossed her arms. "She's sleeping." The cold and stress exhausted her. "I didn't drive through a blizzard to be told I can't see my own mother." His voice remained level, but ice crept into his tone. And I didn't risk staying open in this storm to have someone barge in and disturb an elderly woman who needs rest. Jessica matched his tone exactly, tilting her chin slightly. She's safe, she's warm. She'll be thrilled to see you when she wakes. For a moment, they stood locked in silent confrontation. Jessica could practically see the wheels turning behind those piercing blue eyes, likely calculating the fastest way to get what he wanted. She'd met men like Ethan Mitchell before, men who viewed the world as a series of transactions and people as either assets or obstacles. To her surprise, he exhaled slowly and nodded once. Fine. May I at least look in on her? Of course. Jessica led him through the diner to the small office in back. Quietly, please. Ethan followed, his footsteps soundless despite his size. Jessica opened the door just enough for him to see Eleanor sleeping peacefully on the office couch, wrapped in blankets. Color returned to her cheeks. She was trying to surprise you, Jessica whispered. Got lost in the storm. Your address was in her purse. Ethan studied his mother's face, his expression unreadable. She didn't tell me she was coming. Families are complicated, Jessica replied simply, closing the door. Back in the diner, she gestured to a booth. Coffee? You look like you could use some warmth too. He seemed about to refuse, then glanced out at the worsening storm. Thank you. Jessica poured 2 cups, sliding one across the table as she sat opposite him. She watched as he removed his expensive wool coat, revealing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. How did you find her? Ethan asked after taking a sip of coffee. His eyebrows raised slightly in apparent surprise at the quality. She stumbled in, half frozen, said her taxi dropped her at the wrong address. Jessica wrapped her hands around her mug. She mentioned trying to make amends. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My mother excels at dramatic gestures. Braving a blizzard at her age goes beyond dramatic, Jessica observed. Seems more like determination. You don't know anything about our situation, he said sharply. True, Jessica shrugged. But I know she could have died out there trying to find you. That says something. Ethan studied her with new interest. Most people tiptoed around him, intimidated by his reputation or dazzled by his wealth. This diner manager spoke to him like an equal, like his title and bank account meant nothing. Do you know who I am? He asked suddenly. Jessica couldn't help the small, amused smile that curved her lips. Is that the question you ask everyone you meet? For a moment he looked startled. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Only the ones who aren't impressed by me. I'm impressed by people who earn respect, not people who demand it. She sipped her coffee. But yes, your mother mentioned you run Mitchell Innovations. And you're Jessica Porter. I manage this place. She gestured to the worn but clean diner around them. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her appearance. The simple black dress under her apron. The absence of flashy jewelry. The practical shoes. Yet something about the way she carried herself, the precision of her speech, didn't match the surroundings. Just the manager, he pressed. Currently. Her tone made it clear the subject was closed. Ethan leaned back, his analytical mind piecing together the puzzle before him. Jessica Porter wasn't what she appeared to be. Her hands, though slightly reddened from work, showed the refined care of someone not born to manual labor. Her vocabulary and bearing suggested education, and the way she had stood up to him without fear or fawning indicated experience with power dynamics. How long have you worked here? He asked casually. Long enough to know when someone's interrogating me, she replied with a raised eyebrow. Why the interest in my employment history, Mr. Mitchell? Ethan, he corrected automatically. And I'm curious about the woman who saved my mother from freezing to death. The howling wind rattled the windows, emphasizing the severity of the storm outside. Jessica glanced at her watch. The roads are getting worse. You might be stuck here for the night too. Ethan frowned, pulling out his phone. I have a driver waiting. Even four-wheel drive has limits in this weather. The plows have stopped running until morning. He tapped at his screen, his frown deepening. You're right. Routes to Lakeside are closed. Welcome to my impromptu storm shelter then. Jessica stood, collecting their empty mugs. There's a staff room upstairs with a cart. Not up to your usual standards, I'm sure, but it's clean and warm." Ethan watched as she moved efficiently behind the counter, rinsing mugs and wiping surfaces. There was an economy to her movements, a precision that again struck him as incongruous. Most people fidgeted or grew nervous under his sustained attention. Jessica Porter moved as if she'd forgotten he was there. "How did you end up here?" he asked finally. "Managing a diner in Burlington doesn't seem like my what?" she challenged when he trailed off. "Original career path," he finished carefully. Jessica's hands stilled briefly on the counter. Life has a way of changing our paths when we least expect it. Before Ethan could respond, a crack of thunder sounded outside, followed by the lights flickering ominously. Moments later, they were plunged into darkness. "Perfect," Jessica muttered. She moved with surprising confidence through the dark, locating a flashlight under the counter. Its beam illuminated her face from below as she explained. "Backup generators should kick in for essential systems, but the main lights are out until power's restored." "Do you need help?" Ethan asked, already removing his suit jacket. Jessica's flashlight beam caught his movement. Well, the CEO knows how to roll up his sleeves. "I wasn't born in a boardroom, Ms. Porter," he replied dryly. "Could have fooled me," she murmured. "Check the breaker panel by the back door while I find candles." 15 minutes later, they had established a warm pocket of light in the center of the diner. The gas stove still worked, providing both heat and cooking capability. Jessica had lit hurricane lamps and candles, creating islands of golden light that transformed the humble space into something almost magical. Ethan returned from checking on Eleanor, still sleeping soundly. "Good." Jessica handed him a steaming mug of fresh coffee. "The generators running the essential systems and space heaters in the office and staff room will be cold, but not freezing." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Jessica felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. In the candlelight, Ethan Mitchell looked less like the ruthless businessman she'd heard about, and more like a man, one with remarkable bone structure and eyes that reflected the flickering flames with hypnotic intensity. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking care of my mother." The sincerity in his voice caught Jessica off guard. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. His gaze was direct, searching. Most people would have called emergency services and washed their hands of responsibility. "You gave her your office, made her soup, tucked her in like she was your own family." Jessica looked away, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "I like your mother. She reminds me of my grandmother." "Who were you before this, Jessica Porter?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Before diners and soup and small-town hospitality." The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Jessica's expression closed, her posture subtly shifting. "Someone who learned the hard way that not all successful men have integrity," she replied finally, her voice soft but steel-edged. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should check our supplies. It might be a long night." As she turned away, Ethan caught her wrist gently. The touch sent another current between them, this one charged with something deeper than mere physical awareness. "I've offended you," he said, releasing her immediately when she stiffened. "That wasn't my intention." Jessica looked down at her wrist, then back to his face. In the dancing shadows, his expression seemed genuinely contrite. "No offense taken," she replied evenly, "but some stories aren't meant to be shared with strangers during power outages." "We're hardly strangers now," Ethan countered. "You've seen my mother in her vulnerabilities. You've witnessed me driving through a blizzard for her. And I've seen—" he paused, searching for words. "What?" Jessica challenged. "What exactly do you think you've seen, Mr. Mitchell?" "Someone hiding," he said simply. "Someone much too intelligent and capable to be just managing a roadside diner. Someone running from something, or someone." The accuracy of his assessment sent a chill through Jessica that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Eleanor Mitchell awoke disoriented, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling. The events of the day slowly returned. The taxi, the blinding snow, the kind young woman at the diner. She sat up carefully, her joints protesting. "You're awake." Eleanor turned to find her son sitting in a chair beside the small couch, his features softened in the dim emergency lighting. "Ethan," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. You came. Of course I came. You left me a voicemail saying you were stranded in a blizzard. His tone was measured, but Eleanor could hear the concern beneath it. I wanted to surprise you. For your birthday. She reached for his hand, half expecting him to pull away as he always did. To her surprise, he allowed the contact. My birthday isn't for 3 days, he said, but without the coldness that had characterized their interactions in recent years. I know. I thought we might need time to talk before celebrating. Eleanor squeezed his fingers. I've missed you, Ethan. Something flickered in his eyes. The same vulnerability she remembered from when he was a boy quickly shuddered behind practice control. The roads are closed, he said instead of addressing her comment. We'll have to stay here tonight. The manager has been very accommodating. Jessica, Eleanor smiled. She's a remarkable young woman, isn't she? So capable. Reminds me of myself at that age. Ethan's expression shifted subtly. There's something unusual about her. She doesn't fit here. Not everyone belongs where life has placed them, Eleanor replied softly. You taught me that. Before Ethan could respond, the office door opened and Jessica appeared with a tray. I thought I heard voices. How are you feeling, Eleanor? Her smile was warm as she set down a steaming bowl of soup and fresh tea. Much better, dear, and so happy to see my son. You've been very kind to my mother, Ethan said, standing. What do we owe you for your trouble? Jessica's expression cooled. Nothing. Contrary to what you might believe, Mr. Mitchell, not everything has a price tag. Eleanor glanced between them, sensing tension. Jessica, please call him Ethan. And Ethan, stop trying to throw money at every situation. The poor girl offered shelter, not services. Jessica suppressed a smile at Eleanor's frank assessment. It's fine. Mr. Mitchell and I have already established our differing perspectives. Have we? Ethan raised an eyebrow. I thought we were just getting acquainted. And the semantics? Jessica replied with a dismissive wave. Eleanor, the bathroom is down the hall if you need it. The power's out, but we have emergency lighting and the heat is working. Thank you, dear. Eleanor's sharp eyes hadn't missed the charged atmosphere between her son and the young manager. Perhaps you could show Ethan where he'll be sleeping while I freshen up. Jessica nodded, though her expression suggested she'd rather show Ethan the door. This way, Mr. Mitchell. She led him upstairs to a small room containing a desk, a mini-fridge, and a narrow cot. Staff break room? Not exactly the penthouse, but it's the best I can offer. Ethan surveyed the humble space without comment. And where will you sleep? I'll take one of the booths downstairs. I want to stay near the main entrance in case anyone else needs shelter. He frowned. Take the cot. I'll sleep in a booth. I'm not giving the CEO of Mitchell Innovations a backache on my watch, Jessica retorted. The last thing I need is a lawsuit because you couldn't properly code after sleeping on vinyl upholstery. Despite himself, Ethan felt his lips twitch. Is that your professional assessment? Just practical risk management. She turned to leave, but he stepped into her path. Why do I get the distinct impression you're trying to avoid being alone with me? He asked, his voice lower than before. Jessica met his gaze evenly. Because you're used to women seeking your company, not avoiding it? Touché. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to devastating. But that doesn't answer my question. I have a diner to manage during a power outage, and Blizzard entertaining you isn't on my priority list. Entertaining me? Ethan echoed, stepping closer. Is that what you think I want? Entertainment? Jessica refused to back away, despite his proximity. The small room suddenly felt even smaller, the air between them charged with something dangerous. I think you're a man used to getting what he wants, she said quietly. And right now, you want to solve the puzzle I apparently represent. I'm not interested in being analyzed or acquired, Mr. Mitchell. Ethan, he corrected again, softer this time. Ethan, she conceded. Now, if you'll excuse me. The building creaked ominously as a particularly strong gust of wind battered the old structure. Jessica instinctively reached out to steady herself, her hand landing on Ethan's chest. Through the fine material of his shirt, she could feel his heart beating, fast, like hers. For one breathless moment, they stood frozen, connected by that single point of contact. Ethan's chest. Jessica became acutely aware of his height, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from his body in the chilly room. She pulled away first, clearing her throat. I should check the generator. Downstairs, Jessica found Eleanor arranging blankets in one of the booths. You don't have to do that, she protested. Nonsense, I'm not an invalid. Eleanor smoothed the blanket with practiced hands. Besides, it gives me something to do while you and my son circle each other like wary cats. Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. Eleanor's smile was knowing. He's difficult, my Ethan. Life made him that way. But there's a good heart underneath all that armor. Mrs. Mitchell, Eleanor, please. Eleanor, whatever you think you observed between your son and me, I assure you it's nothing. We're strangers who happen to be trapped by a storm. Fate has interesting methods, Eleanor replied cryptically. Now tell me more about yourself, Jessica. What brought you to this charming little diner? Eleanor. Jessica busied herself adjusting candles. It's not an exciting story. I disagree, came Ethan's voice as he descended the stairs. I think it's probably very exciting. Jessica shot him a warning glance. Your mother needs rest, not my life history. Actually, Eleanor interjected, what I need is food. I'm starving. Grateful for the diversion, Jessica headed to the kitchen. I can make sandwiches. The gas stove still works if you prefer something hot. Allow me to help, Ethan offered, following her before she could object. In the kitchen, Jessica pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. Make yourself useful and slice the bread. To her surprise, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and did as instructed. He handled the knife with unexpected skill, cutting even slices from the artisan loaf. You've done that before, she observed. I worked in a deli through college. At her startled look, he added, Did you think I was born a CEO? Honestly? Yes. Ethan laughed, a rich sound that transformed his face again. My father was a high school science teacher. My mother was a nurse. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Rochester and worked every summer from age 16. Jessica handed him tomatoes to slice. So, how did you become? She gestured vaguely at his expensive watch and tailored shirt. The heartless corporate titan, he supplied dryly. Your words, not mine. I created an algorithm that revolutionized supply chain management while still in grad school. Built a company around it. It made some good decisions, some brutal ones. He deftly arranged the tomato slices on the bread. The rest is business history. And somewhere along the way, you stopped speaking to your mother, Jessica added softly. Ethan's hand stilled. That's a complicated situation. Family usually is. Jessica turned to the stove, stirring a pot of soup she'd set to warm. You're not close with yours? He asked, moving beside her to help. Jessica kept her eyes on the pot. My parents died when I was in college. Car accident. I'm sorry. The simple words held genuine sympathy. It was a long time ago. I'm sorry. She reached past him for bowls, her arm brushing his. Again, that unsettling awareness flared between them. And, after college? Ethan pressed gently. Where did Jessica Porter go before she arrived at this diner? Jessica ladled soup into bowls with precise movements. New York, finance. It didn't work out. Wall Street. Ethan's interest sharpened. Which firm? Does it matter? She placed the bowls on a tray. That life is behind me now. It matters because you're running from something, Ethan said quietly. And whatever it is has forced someone with obvious intelligence and education to hide in a small-town diner. Jessica turned to face him, her composure slipping for the first time. Not everyone who steps away from corporate America is running or hiding. Some of us simply discovered that success by those standards comes at too high a price. The raw honesty in her voice silenced him. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the dim kitchen, the storm raging outside while something equally turbulent built between them. Who hurt you, Jessica? Who? Ethan asked finally, his voice barely audible above the wind. Her laugh was soft, bitter. The better question is, who didn't? Before he could respond, the back door of the diner burst open, sending a blast of cold air through the kitchen. Jessica whirled around, startled, as a man staggered in from the storm, snow-coating his expensive overcoat. "Thank God," the newcomer exclaimed, stamping his feet. "I thought I'd freeze to death out there." Ethan stiffened beside her. "James," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" The man looked up, recognition and relief washing over his face. "Ethan, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Your mother called the office looking for you, and when I heard you'd gone out in the storm," he stopped abruptly as his gaze fell on Jessica. For one suspended moment, recognition flashed in his eyes, followed immediately by something darker. Fear. "Jessica Porter," he said, his voice suddenly strained. "Well, this is unexpected." Jessica had gone perfectly still, her face drained of color. "James Harrington," she whispered. "Of all the diners in all the storms." Ethan looked between them, his analytical mind racing to connect the pieces. "You two know each other." It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway, his charming smile returning too quickly. "Ancient history. Ms. Porter once worked at my investment firm." He extended his hand. "Small world, isn't it?" Jessica stared at the offered hand like it was a venomous snake. "Very small," she agreed, not moving to take it, and getting smaller by the minute. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them, the air suddenly thick with tension. Ethan looked between Jessica and James, noting the rigid set of Jessica's shoulders and the forced casualness in James's smile. "Miss Porter was one of our brightest analysts." James continued smoothly when the silence stretched too long. "Left quite suddenly, as I recall." "I had my reasons," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the pallor of her face. "Compelling ones." James removed his snow-dusted coat, hanging it as if he owned the place. "Water under the bridge, surely." He turned to Ethan. "When Eleanor called looking for you, I was concerned. The roads are treacherous. You drove all this way because my mother called the office." Ethan's skepticism was evident. "I was already in Burlington for the Nortec acquisition meeting when I couldn't reach you." James shrugged. "You know how I worry." Jessica wordlessly gathered the food she'd prepared onto a tray. "I should take this to Eleanor." As she tried to pass, James shifted, blocking her path. "Let me help you with that, Jessica. We have so much to catch up on." "I've got it," she said flatly, sidestepping him. Ethan observed the interaction with growing suspicion. "James, a word?" He gestured toward the walk-in pantry, away from the kitchen's main area. Once inside, Ethan didn't mince words. "What history do you have with her?" James raised his eyebrows. Straight to the point, as always. "She worked at Harrington Capital for about 18 months, promising career until she had some kind of breakdown. Ethical crisis, she called it." He shook his head. "Shame. She had potential. And that's all. Now what else would there be?" James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't tell me the great Ethan Mitchell is interested in a diner manager." "She's hiding something," Ethan said, ignoring the jab. "And based on her reaction to you, it involves Harrington Capital." James leaned against a shelf. "Ethan, you know how these young idealists are. They come to Wall Street thinking they'll change the world, then can't handle the reality of business." Jessica couldn't separate her personal feelings from professional decisions. It made her unstable. "She seems anything but unstable to me." "You've known her for what, a few hours?" James laughed softly. "I employed her for over a year. Trust me, there's a reason she's serving coffee in Vermont instead of managing portfolios in Manhattan." Ethan studied his friend and business partner carefully. James had been his right-hand man since Mitchell Innovations began, instrumental in their meteoric rise. They'd weathered countless storms together, professional and personal. Yet something about James's too casual dismissal of Jessica bothered him. "She took care of my mother," Ethan said finally. "I owe her for that." "Of course you do. Just don't mistake gratitude for something more." James clapped him on the shoulder. "Now, shall we join the ladies? I'm starving." When they returned to the main dining area, they found Jessica and Eleanor seated in a booth, talking quietly. Jessica's posture remained tense, but she'd regained her color. She looked up as the men approached, her eyes skipping over James to focus on Ethan. "Eleanor has been telling me about your childhood science experiments," she said, a forced lightness in her tone. Apparently, you were building robots while other kids were riding bikes. Mother exaggerates, Ethan replied, sliding into the seat beside Jessica while James took the spot next to Eleanor. I do not, Eleanor protested. You rewired the entire basement when you were 12, nearly burned the house down. That was one time, Ethan said, the corner of his mouth lifting. James reached for a sandwich. Ethan was always ahead of the curve. It's what makes him such a brilliant CEO, willing to take calculated risks that others avoid. Even when those risks affect people's lives, Jessica asked, her question seemingly innocent, but with an undercurrent that made Ethan look at her sharply. Business always affects lives, James replied smoothly. The trick is focusing on the greater good rather than individual sentimentality. And who decides what that greater good is? Jessica pressed. Those with the vision and authority to make such decisions, James answered. Wouldn't you agree, Ethan? All eyes turned to him. Ethan considered his response carefully, aware of the sudden weight his words carried in this strange tableau. I believe in ethical business practices, he said finally. Profit without principle is ultimately unsustainable. Jessica's expression remained neutral, but he caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Noble sentiments, James remarked, though sometimes difficult to apply in practice, as Jessica discovered. He turned to her. How long have you been in Burlington? It must be, 3 years now? 4, she corrected, her jaw tight. 4 years, James echoed thoughtfully. Amazing how time flies. You know, Ethan, Jessica was involved in an interesting situation before she left Harrington Capital. Perhaps she's told you about it? The subtle threat in his tone was unmistakable. Jessica set down her spoon, her knuckles white. James, she said quietly, don't. Eleanor, sensing the rising tension, intervened. I'm feeling rather tired. Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow. Of course, Jessica agreed, quickly standing. Let me refresh your blankets. As Jessica helped Eleanor back to the office, James leaned toward Ethan. She hasn't told you, has she? Told me what? Why she really left New York? James shook his head. I'm not surprised. It's not something she'd be proud of. Stop dancing around it, Ethan demanded. What happened? James studied him for a moment. She accused Harrington Capital of fraud. Claimed we were manipulating market data, misleading clients. Tried to take her evidence to the SEC. Ethan frowned. And were you? James looked genuinely offended. Of course not. We were cleared of all allegations. But by then, the damage to Jessica's reputation was done. No firm on Wall Street would touch her after that kind of betrayal, so she ran to Vermont. Can you blame her? She tried to destroy the company that gave her every opportunity. James's expression softened to concern. Look, I'm not telling you this to speak ill of her. I'm telling you because we're on the verge of the biggest acquisition of our careers. The Nortec deal will triple Mitchell Innovations' market value if nothing derails it. What does Jessica have to do with Nortec? Probably nothing, James conceded. But timing is everything. We can't afford any complications. Before Ethan could respond, Jessica returned. The sight of her head, held high despite the obvious strain around her eyes, made something twist in his chest. Eleanor's settled, she announced. I've made up a couple more beds in case the storm brings other strays. James stood, straightening his suit. I should check in with the office. Is there anywhere I might make a private call? And the storage room has the strongest signal, Jessica replied tonelessly. After James departed, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. Ethan watched Jessica methodically clearing dishes, her movements precise but mechanical. Were you planning to tell me? He asked finally. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. About James? It didn't seem relevant until he walked through that door. About your allegations against his company. Jessica's hand stilled. She turned to face him, her expression carefully composed. So he shared his version of events. He says you accused Harrington Capital of fraud, that the allegations were investigated and dismissed. Is that all he said? She asked, a bitter smile touching her lips. Should there be more? Jessica studied him for a long moment. Would it matter if there were? James Harrington is your friend and business partner. I'm just the woman who happened to shelter your mother during a storm. At the distance in her voice bothered him more than it should have. I prefer to form my own judgments. Based on what? You barely know me, Ethan. I'm a good judge of character. So was I once. She turned back to the dishes. Look how that worked out for me. Ethan stepped closer, invading her space until she was forced to face him again. Tell me your side. Why? So you can decide which of us is lying. She shook her head. I don't need to justify myself to you. Damn it, Jessica. He caught himself, lowering his voice. I'm trying to understand. No, you're trying to protect your business interests. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. James made sure to mention your big acquisition, didn't he? Warned you that I might be a complication. Ethan's silence confirmed her suspicion. That's what I thought. She moved to step around him, but he caught her arm. What did you find at Harrington Capital? He asked quietly. For a moment, it seemed she might tell him. Then the back door opened again as James returned, his timing impeccable as always. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his smile suggested he was anything but sorry. Ethan, I need to speak with you about the Nortec situation. Something's come up. Jessica pulled her arm from Ethan's grasp. I should check the generator anyway. As she disappeared into the back, James handed Ethan his phone. You should see this email that just came through. Ethan scanned the message, his expression hardening. This data can't be right. That's what I thought, but I've triple-checked the figures. James took the phone back. Nortec's valuation was inflated. If we'd gone through with the acquisition at the agreed price, we'd have overpaid by millions, Ethan finished grimly. At best. At worst, we could have been accused of knowingly engaging in securities fraud. James ran a hand through his hair. We dodged a bullet, Ethan. How did you find this? One of our analysts caught it, pure luck. But it makes me wonder how many other deals might have similar issues lurking in their financial reports. Ethan frowned, his mind racing through implications. We need to overhaul our due diligence process. If we miss this, exactly my concern. James hesitated. There's something else. James said to me, the analyst who caught it found Jessica Porter's name on some of the original Nortec prospectus documents from her time at Harrington Capital. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. Just noting a curious coincidence. James's expression was neutral. She had access to the early Nortec financials. Then she makes fraud allegations against Harrington. Now she's mysteriously back in your orbit, just as we're about to acquire Nortec. That's quite a conspiracy theory, is it? The woman who tried to destroy my company just happens to be here, with your mother, the night before our biggest deal. James shook his head. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient. Ethan wanted to dismiss James's suspicions, but years of business instinct kept him from doing so outright. Jessica Porter was hiding something, that much was clear, and timing was indeed suspicious. I'll talk to her, he decided. Get to the bottom of it. Just be careful, James warned. She's convincing, trust me. I learned that the hard way. When Jessica returned, she found the two men huddled in conversation. They broke apart at her approach, and the sudden silence spoke volumes. The way Ethan looked at her, more guarded than before, analytical rather than curious, told her everything she needed to know. The generator should last through the night, she reported, her voice professional and distant. If you gentlemen will excuse me, I have some inventory to complete before morning. Jessica, Ethan called after her, we need to talk. She paused, not turning around. I think your business partner has said everything that needs saying, Mr. Mitchell. The formality stung. You haven't told your side. Would it make a difference? She glanced back, her smile sad. Some battles aren't worth fighting twice. Later that night, as the storm howled outside, Ethan found himself unable to sleep on the narrow cot. The Nortec situation demanded his attention, but his thoughts kept circling back to Jessica Porter, the hurt in her eyes when she'd realized he was doubting her, the resignation in her voice. A soft knock interrupted his ruminations. He opened the door to find Eleanor standing there, wrapped in a blanket. Mother, you should be resting. I've had quite enough rest. She moved past him into the small room. We need to talk about Jessica. There's nothing to discuss. Don't lie to me, Ethan. I raised you. Eleanor settled onto the edge of the cot. James Harrington has poisoned your mind against her, hasn't he? Ethan sighed. It's complicated. There's history between them. Professional conflicts that could impact our business. And that's all that matters to you? Business? Eleanor's disappointment was palpable. That girl saved my life today, and you're letting that snake turn you against her without even hearing her story. I tried to hear her story. She wouldn't tell me. Ah, would you in her position, after the way you looked at her just now? Eleanor shook her head. I may be old, Ethan, but I know a good soul when I meet one. And I know when my son is making a terrible mistake. What would you have me do? Dismiss legitimate business concerns because she was kind to you? I would have you remember that not everyone is motivated by profit and power. Eleanor rose with dignity. Your father would be disappointed to see what you've become. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a commotion downstairs drew their attention. Stay here, he instructed, heading for the stairs. In the main dining area, he found Jessica confronting James, their voices low but intense. You have no right, she was saying, fury evident in every line of her body. No right to come here and threaten me again. Threaten? I'm simply having a friendly conversation about old times. James's smug smile vanished when he noticed Ethan. Ah, there you are. Jessica and I were just reminiscing. It didn't sound like reminiscing, Ethan observed coldly. Mr. Harrington was just leaving, Jessica announced, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Apparently the storm has cleared enough for travel. James shrugged. The plows came through. Roads to the north are passable now. He collected his coat. Ethan, we should leave too. The Nortec situation requires our immediate attention. Nortec, Jessica repeated, the word like ice on her tongue. Of course. It all makes sense now. Something in her expression made Ethan pause. What do you know about Nortec? Before she could answer, James interrupted. Ethan, this is hardly the time or place. We have a crisis to manage. It was Nortec, wasn't it? Jessica's gaze never left Ethan's face. That was what I found. The fraud at Harrington Capital, it involved Nortec. Nortec. The word hung in the air between them. James's face hardened, his charm evaporating like snow on a hot engine. You're delusional, he snapped. Ethan, we need to leave. Now. But Ethan didn't move. His eyes locked on Jessica's. Explain. Jessica straightened, years of suppressed fury and vindication coursing through her veins. 3 years ago, I discovered irregularities in Nortec's financial reports while working at Harrington Capital. Multiple reports systematically altered to inflate their value. When I brought my concerns to management, her gaze flicked to James. I was told to adjust my findings. She's lying, James interjected. Nortec's financials were thoroughly vetted. By whom? Jessica challenged. The same team you instructed to falsify data. The same analysts who mysteriously all received promotions after I was discredited. Ethan held up his hand, silencing James's retort. Continue, he told Jessica. She drew a steadying breath. When I refused to participate, I was removed from the Nortec account. A week later, I found evidence that the manipulation went beyond Nortec. It was systematic. Harrington Capital was artificially inflating the value of multiple companies before acquisition deals. Preposterous, James scoffed. If there had been any truth to these allegations, the SEC would have. The SEC investigation was a sham, Jessica cut in. Because by the time I gathered enough evidence to approach them, someone had already altered the original data. My access credentials had been used to make changes I never authorized. It made it appear I was the one committing fraud. A heavy silence followed her words. James's face had gone still, too still, and Ethan's analytical mind registered the unnatural composure. Not outrage, not shock. Calculation. You were set up, Ethan said quietly. Yes. Jessica's eyes never left his. By the time I realized what had happened, I'd been fired for ethical violations, blacklisted from every financial institution in New York. My former colleagues were warned not to associate with me. My reputation was destroyed. So you ran, Ethan concluded. I didn't run, Jessica corrected, chin lifting. I was pushed out, threatened with litigation if I pursued my claims. with no job, mounting legal bills, and suddenly toxic to every firm in Manhattan. I had to start over. Convenient story, James interrupted, his voice smooth again, but ultimately unprovable. The SEC found nothing. Because you destroyed the evidence, Jessica retorted. But you didn't get all of it. James went very still. What do you mean? Jessica's smile was cold. Insurance policy. Before my access was revoked, I made copies. I may have been naive about how far you'd go to silence me, but I wasn't stupid. You're bluffing, James said, but his face had paled slightly. Am I? She turned to Ethan. The Nortec acquisition you're pursuing. What made you suddenly question their valuation tonight? Ethan's expression revealed nothing. Data inconsistencies, specifically revenue projection anomalies, discrepancies between reported earnings and actual cash flow. Jessica nodded. The same issues I flagged 3 years ago, I'm guessing. Only the numbers are probably worse now, because they've had years to compound the fraud. Eleanor had appeared at the base of the stairs, watching the confrontation with concern. Ethan. He didn't turn. It's all right, Mother. Go back to bed. No, Eleanor said firmly, approaching. I don't think it is all right. Not if what I'm hearing is true. James recovered his composure, assuming his most reassuring smile. Mrs. Mitchell, I assure you this is just a misunderstanding. Miss Porter has a personal vendetta. Young man, Eleanor interrupted. I was married to a high school science teacher for 40 years. I know what integrity looks like, and right now, I don't see it in you. James's smile froze. With all due respect, enough. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. James, did you know about the Nortec fraud? There was no fraud, James insisted. Just aggressive accounting practices common in. Did you know? Each word fell like a hammer. For the first time, James looked uncertain. You're not seriously taking her side? After everything we've built together? She's nobody, Ethan. A failed analyst who couldn't handle the pressure of real business. Answer the question. James's expression hardened. Fine. Yes, I knew Nortec was cooking their books. Everyone knew. It's how the game is played. We would have fixed it after acquisition, restructured their reporting, and no one would have been the wiser. Except the shareholders who would have paid an inflated price, Jessica pointed out. The employees who would have lost jobs in the restructuring. The pension funds invested in both companies. Collateral damage, James dismissed. The kind of casualties Ethan has never hesitated to accept in pursuit of growth. Isn't that right, partner? Ethan's expression remained impassive, but Jessica saw something shift in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. You said you have evidence? Ethan asked Jessica, ignoring James's attempt to implicate him. I do. Not here, obviously. It's in a safe place. Alleged evidence, James corrected, which conveniently can't be produced right now. I don't need to produce it right now, Jessica replied evenly. Just explain what it contains. The original Nortec reports. Emails directing analysts to alter data. The access log showing my credentials being used while I was demonstrably elsewhere. She turned to Ethan. Do you want to know how deep it goes? How many other acquisitions were based on fraudulent data? She's lying, James insisted, a hint of desperation entering his voice. Ethan, we've been friends for 15 years. Partners. I've stood by you through everything. Are you really going to throw that away based on the word of this waitress? Manager, Jessica corrected automatically. Ethan remained silent, weighing, evaluating. Jessica could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Loyalty versus truth. Friendship versus integrity. The empire he'd built versus the foundation it stood on. Think about what you're doing, James warned. If she takes this public, it won't just be me who falls. Mitchell Innovations has been involved in every major deal Harrington Capital has structured for the past decade. Your reputation, your company. Stop. Ethan's voice was quiet but final. You're making my decision easier with every word, James. Eleanor moved to stand beside Jessica, placing a supportive hand on her arm. The simple gesture of solidarity brought unexpected tears to Jessica's eyes. James looked between them in disbelief. You can't be serious. Ethan, Everything we've built was built on fraud, apparently. Ethan's face had hardened to granite. Get out. You'll regret this, James hissed. When your stock plummets and the lawsuits start, I said get out. Ethan stepped forward, his heightened presence suddenly intimidating. Now, before I call the authorities and have this conversation in front of witnesses with badges. For one tense moment, it seemed James might refuse. Then, with deliberate calm, he straightened his coat. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. After James stormed out, the diner fell into heavy silence. Jessica realized she was trembling. Adrenaline and relief and lingering fear coursing through her veins. I should check if he's actually left, she murmured, needing a moment alone to compose herself. Let him go, Ethan replied, still watching the door. We have bigger concerns now. Eleanor squeezed Jessica's arm gently. I'll make us some tea. This seems like a conversation that needs tea. When Eleanor had bustled off to the kitchen, Ethan finally turned to face Jessica. His expression was unreadable. You've had this evidence for 3 years, he said. Why didn't you use it? Jessica sank into a booth, suddenly exhausted. I tried. No one would listen. James had thoroughly discredited me, and Harrington Capital had resources I couldn't match. Then there were the threats. What threats? At first, just professional ones. Then more. Personal. She looked down at her hands. One night, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was taken, but my files were clearly searched. The next day, I received a photo of my parents' graves with a message. Some things should stay buried. Ethan's jaw tightened. James, I never found proof, but the timing was persuasive. She looked up, meeting his eyes. So I left, started over, tried to build a quiet life where no one from that world would find me. Until tonight, Ethan said softly. Until tonight, she agreed. He slid into the booth across from her. I need to see this evidence. Why? So Mitchell Innovations can contain the damage? The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. So I can do the right thing, Ethan corrected quietly. Jessica studied his face, looking for deception. And what is the right thing, in your estimation? I don't know yet. His honesty was disarming. But burying the truth, isn't it? Eleanor returned with 3 mugs of tea, sliding one to each of them, before joining Ethan on his side of the booth. So, she said briskly, my son's business partner is a criminal, and the lovely young woman who saved me from freezing to death is his whistleblower. What are we going to do about it? The unexpected framing of their situation, so practical, so matter-of-fact, startled a laugh from Jessica. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd genuinely laughed. Mother? Ethan sighed, though the corner of his mouth twitched. What, am I wrong? Eleanor sipped her tea. I may be old, Ethan, but I'm not blind. Or stupid. No one who's met you would ever make that mistake, Jessica said, smiling despite herself. Then stop dancing around each other and make a plan. Eleanor set down her mug with finality. Jessica has evidence. Ethan has influence. Between you, you can fix this mess. It's not that simple, Ethan began. It never is, Eleanor agreed. But doing the right thing rarely is. Jessica watched as Ethan's expression softened, looking at his mother. For all their estrangement, the bond between them was evident. A shared moral clarity that cut through complications. The evidence is in a safe deposit box, Jessica said after a moment. In Boston. Ethan nodded. Once the storm clears, we'll go there, together. And then, she pressed, and then we bring the truth to light. Properly this time, with resources James can't intimidate or outmaneuver. Your company will survive, Ethan finished firmly. Mitchell Innovations is more than its partnerships. The foundations are solid, even if some of the structures built on them aren't. Eleanor beamed at her son, pride evident in every line of her face. That's my boy. For the first time in years, Jessica allowed herself to feel hope. Fragile, but real. It won't be easy. James has powerful friends. Deep pockets. So do I, Ethan reminded her, a spark of the ruthless businessman returning, but now directed toward a worthy target. And unlike James, I don't have to hide from the truth. Eleanor yawned, breaking the intensity of the moment. Well, this has been quite an evening. I think I'll try to get some more sleep before dawn. She patted Jessica's hand. Don't worry, dear. My son can be stubborn and sometimes arrogant, but when it matters, he makes the right choices. After Eleanor had gone, Jessica and Ethan sat in companionable silence, the storm outside beginning to ease, much like the turbulence between them. I'm sorry I doubted you, Ethan said finally. You had reason to, Jessica acknowledged. Loyalty to friends is admirable, even when misplaced, not at the expense of truth. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, or justice. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes, made something shift inside Jessica. A wall beginning to crumble, a door, long closed, starting to open. Why are you helping me? Why are you helping me? She asked softly. You could have left with James, protected your company, your reputation. Perhaps I'm tired of being the ruthless CEO everyone expects. His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. Or perhaps I found something more important than quarterly projections and market share. In a small-town diner during a blizzard? She smiled skeptically. Stranger things have happened. His answering smile transformed his face, warming his eyes. My mother would say it was fate. And what would Ethan Mitchell say? He considered her question seriously. That sometimes we need to get lost to find what we're really looking for. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to illuminate the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed, pristine, unblemished, full of new possibilities, much like the feelings taking root between them. 6 months later, Jessica stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's penthouse, watching snow drift lazily over Burlington. The view of Lake Champlain at sunset was breathtaking, painted in shades of gold and crimson. But her attention was on the headline blazing across her tablet. Harrington Capital executives indicted for securities fraud. Quite the anniversary gift, Ethan said, joining her at the window. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting atop her head. 6 months isn't an anniversary, Jessica corrected, leaning back against him. It's a milestone. 6 months since a blizzard and a lost mother changed everything, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. I'd call that worth celebrating. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. The evidence in Jessica's Boston safe deposit box had proven devastating, not just for James Harrington, but for an entire network of financial manipulation that had infected multiple firms. The SEC investigation this time had been thorough and uncompromising, thanks in no small part to Ethan's influence and resources. Mitchell Innovations had weathered the storm. The company's stock had taken an initial hit when Ethan publicly disclosed the fraudulent practices within their partner companies, but his transparency and commitment to reform had ultimately strengthened their position. Investors respected integrity, it turned out, especially when backed by decisive action. I still can't believe it's finally over, Jessica said, setting down the tablet. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, and now, justice, Ethan finished, though I'm not sure 13 years in federal prison is enough for what James did to you. It's not about the punishment, it's about the truth finally being acknowledged. She turned in his arms to face him. And about reclaiming my life. Ethan traced the curve of her cheek with his thumb. Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to my offer? After the evidence had been secured and the legal proceedings begun, Ethan had offered Jessica a position heading up a new ethics and compliance division at Mitchell Innovations. The role would leverage her financial expertise while establishing industry-leading standards for transparent business practices. I'm still considering it, she replied, though her smile suggested otherwise. Working for my boyfriend seems complicated. Then make it uncomplicated, Ethan suggested, his tone casual, despite the sudden intensity in his eyes. How exactly would I do that? Marry me instead. Jessica froze, certain she had misheard. What did you just say? I said, Ethan repeated, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Marry me instead? He opened it to reveal a stunning emerald ring set in platinum. Then I'd be working for my wife, not the other way around. How do you figure that? Jessica asked, her voice unsteady as she stared at the ring. Because you'd own me, heart and soul. His usual confidence wavered slightly. You already do. Jessica looked up from the ring to his face, seeing vulnerability there she once thought impossible from the ruthless CEO she'd first met. "This is sudden, is it? 6 months of 14-hour days rebuilding my company's ethical framework together, learning to trust again, both of us. Falling asleep, going over SEC testimony, and waking up in each other's arms." His smile turned wry. "Mother says, we've been married in all but name since the night of the blizzard." "Your mother," Jessica laughed, "is a romantic meddler." "My mother," Ethan corrected, "is never wrong, especially about what's good for me." Jessica took the ring box from his hand, studying the emerald. "Why not a diamond?" "Because you're not conventional. You're rare, valuable, and the exact color of your eyes when you're about to challenge me on something ridiculous I've said in a meeting." His smile softened. "Also, diamonds remind you of Wall Street, and I wanted something that only reminded you of us." "You've thought this through," she said, impressed, despite herself. "I'm thorough," he agreed, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "Jessica, you haven't answered me." She looked up at him, at this man who had transformed from the cold, ruthless CEO to someone who fought for truth and justice alongside her, who had risked his company and reputation to do what was right, who looked at her now not as a conquest or an asset, but as an equal, someone to build a life with. "Before I answer," she said carefully, "I need to know something. If I say yes, am I accepting a job as well as a proposal? Because I'm not sure." "The job offer is separate," Ethan interrupted. "Accept it. Decline it. Counter offer. That's business. This," he gestured to the ring, "is personal, the only merger I care about right now." "In that case," Jessica said, slipping the ring onto her finger, "I accept. The proposal, that is. The job offer still requires negotiation." Joy transformed Ethan's face as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He set her down gently. "Name your terms, future Mrs. Mitchell." "Oh no," she laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm keeping Porter professionally. You'll have to earn having your name on my office door." "Challenge accepted," he murmured against her lips. Later that evening, they celebrated with Eleanor at Maple Street Diner, now under new ownership, Jessica's. She had purchased it with part of the substantial settlement she'd received when Harrington Capital's fraudulent practices were exposed. To second chances, Eleanor toasted, raising her champagne glass. The diner had been closed for the private celebration, its worn booths and polished counters gleaming with new life, much like its owner. "And to blizzards," Ethan added with a grin. "May they always lead us exactly where we need to be." "Even if it's not where we plan to go," Jessica finished, her heart full as she looked between her future husband and the woman who would soon be her mother-in-law. Eleanor beamed at them. "I knew it from the moment I saw you two together. The way you challenged each other, respected each other, no pretense, no games." "Mother," Ethan warned good-naturedly. "What?" "I'm allowed to be smug." Eleanor patted Jessica's hand. "He needed someone who saw the man behind the CEO. And you, my dear, needed someone who would stand beside you in the fight, not run from it." As if on cue, the bell above the diner door jingled. They turned to see Mr. Winters, their first customer from the night of the blizzard, entering with a small wrapped package. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, approaching their booth. "Just heard the news about the engagement and wanted to drop this off." "You're always welcome, Arthur," Jessica assured him, accepting the gift. Inside was a beautiful hand-carved wooden snowflake. "Made it myself," Mr. Winters explained, "to remember how it all started." "It's perfect," Jessica said, genuinely touched. After he left, Ethan examined the delicate carving. "We should have a winter wedding," he suggested. "Come full circle." "In the diner?" Jessica teased. "Why not?" Eleanor chimed in. "It would be uniquely yours." "I was joking," Jessica protested. "I'm not," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Not entirely. Not about the winter part, at least. There's something poetic about finding our future in the season that brought us together." Jessica considered the idea, warming to it despite herself. December, she decided, but not in the diner. "The lakeside, then?" Ethan suggested, "with the mountains in the background." "Cold," Eleanor observed. We'll keep each other warm, Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Jessica's. 6 months later, as December snow dusted the shores of Lake Champlain, Jessica Porter became Jessica Porter Mitchell in an intimate ceremony witnessed by their closest friends. Eleanor, radiant in silver blue, dabbed at tears as they exchanged vows beneath an arch of winter roses and pine boughs. "When I first met you," Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering, "you challenged everything I thought I knew about success, about worth, about what matters. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to run. You chose truth when lies would have been safer." He squeezed her hands. "I promise to be worthy of that courage every day of our lives together." "When I first met you," Jessica replied, her smile teasing despite the tears in her eyes, "I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever encountered." Laughter rippled through the audience. "I wasn't wrong," she continued, "but I discovered that your arrogance was matched by your integrity once you found it again, your determination by your compassion, your ambition by your capacity for love." Her voice softened. "I promise to remind you of those qualities whenever the world tries to make you forget them again." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, snow began to fall. Gentle, pristine flakes that glittered like diamonds in the winter sunlight. "A perfect circle," Eleanor would later say. "A story written in snow and second chances." At the reception, Jessica found herself momentarily alone, watching Ethan across the room as he laughed with friends. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate whistleblower and a ruthless CEO to partners in every sense. "Penny for your thoughts?" Eleanor appeared at her side, resplendent in her mother-of-the-groom finery. "Just reflecting on how different his life might have been if you hadn't gotten lost in that blizzard," Jessica replied, linking her arm through the older woman's. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Who says I was lost?" Jessica stared at her. "You mean sometimes?" Eleanor said with a mysterious smile. "A mother knows exactly what her son needs, even when he doesn't." "You planned it?" Jessica asked incredulously. "Getting stranded at my diner?" "Planned is a strong word. Let's say I created an opportunity. The blizzard was just fortunate timing." She patted Jessica's hand. "The taxi driver was very well compensated, I assure you." Before Jessica could respond, Ethan joined them, sliding his arm around his new wife's waist. "What are you two conspiring about?" "Your mother was just explaining." "How happy I am that you found each other," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "A perfect match, as if fate itself arranged it." "And/or a meddling mother," Jessica murmured, though her eyes danced with amusement. "What was that, dear?" Eleanor asked innocently. "Nothing," Jessica laughed, leaning into Ethan's embrace. "Just agreeing about fate." As they moved to the dance floor for their first waltz as husband and wife, Ethan pulled her close. "You look like you're keeping a secret," he observed. Jessica smiled up at him, snowflakes catching in her lashes. "I'll tell you someday, when we're old and gray and still arguing about ethics violations in board meetings." "Promise?" he asked, spinning her beneath the twinkling lights. "Promise," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Burlington in a fresh blanket of possibility. A reminder that sometimes the most perfect endings begin with unexpected storms and the courage to shelter someone in need.